David Potter, Vice President Media.
Hello.
At Unilever.
Wow, real people for the second time in I think about a month. It's quite strange.
I think you can remove your mask.
No, I can't. Oh, yes, I can. Good to be here. So, Stephan, I think the last time I saw you in the flesh was here 2 years ago. And sadly, no Grand Prix this time around, but I'm sure we'll get that organised next year. The world seems to be opening up a bit, and I'm always fascinated, especially with our sort of wide geographies, to see how different things are around the world. So, are things looking better from your perspective?
Look, I think we're seeing a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. We're getting there in stages, with some setbacks too. But overall, it feels like we're on the way out of this pandemic. I think it's fair to say that it has been a very challenging time for many of us, personally and professionally. But I'm always keen to look at things in terms of what have been the upsides to this crisis we've been through. And as you take a step back and look at our industry today, compared to what it was pre-pandemic, I think there are three things which make me actually more optimistic. One is, I think this pandemic has driven home the climate emergency. I think it's absolutely fascinating to see how suddenly people in Sao Paulo, in Singapore, in Tokyo, and London realize at the same time that the planet we live on is damn vulnerable and can actually come to a standstill overnight. I think that is changing fundamentally the way people look at climate. The other thing which makes me optimistic from an industry perspective is the way diversity and inclusion has been embraced in our industry. Clearly, Black Lives Matter has had a huge impact in the US and beyond, but more generally, this realization that we can do much better than that we are today. And the third thing is, we've seen such a fascinating acceleration of the digital agenda, and you're seeing it firsthand here in Asia. E-commerce, digital ad spend, etc. And how that has made it indispensable for us as an industry to revisit the way we measure. Today we're still measuring in silos. We measure TV, we measure digital, we measure outdoor. And finally, we now have actually a project that's going to come to fruition in the UK and the US over the next 12 months that is led by WFA. That is going to lead to a cross-media measurement system that will be consistent around the world, and that makes me very confident also in the way the industry is going to come out of this pandemic. So overall, I think there are some upsides to it, and they will make our industry, I think, stronger post-pandemic.
Great. And I think you, along with quite a lot of Unilever people, were at COP26 in Glasgow this year. You want to share some of?
Yeah, so COP26 was 10 days ago in Glasgow. It was my first ever climate summit, never been there before. It was such a fascinating experience after 2 years of basically working from home, to be suddenly in a place where delegates from all around the world, climate activists, politicians, business leaders, tech startup entrepreneurs come together. And this mingling, just felt so good. But the theme was, is an urgent theme, is a very serious theme. What I take out of my experience in COP26 are four things. One is the climate emergency is here. So if you want to quantify it, for us to hit the objectives by 2030 in terms of CO2 emission reduction, we need to remove 29 gigatons per year of CO2 on a global level. COP26 promises, collectively, will deliver, provided those promises are being delivered. But that represents 12 to 14 gigatons. So in the best case scenario, what you heard in COP26 is half of what's needed. So there's no doubt that next year and the following year, we will need to increase the changes that we're all committing to. That's my first learning. So the urgency is there, and we're playing it over time. Second learning for me is the media attention was very much focused on political leaders. It was the US-China rivalry, the Brazilian president not turning up, etc. That made the headlines in the press. But the real news, which got less coverage, is this time around, businesses engaged in a manner that has never been seen before. So companies have actually factored into their strategies the climate agenda. You probably heard announcements on deforestation, on the end of the combustion engine in a number of countries, on the methane agreement, the Amazon, Tesco, IKEA going to remove renewables from the fossil fuel from the supply chains. So the industry commitment and presence, much more significant than in previous years, and potentially more important in terms of driving real change. The third thing, and I think that's key for us to understand, is that half of the CO2 emission reductions between now and 2030 will have to be delivered through consumer behavior change. Until now, most of those CO2 reductions were delivered through technology. Going forward, half of that will have to be consumer behavior change. And guess what? Marketers will have to drive that consumer behavior change. So marketers will be central in that global effort. And the fourth thing is, and that was truly new to me, marketers and the marketing industry overall were welcomed in that summit. I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. No, climate activists, NGOs, politicians, I wasn't exactly sure. They're asking more of us rather than less of us. They are looking to us to help find solutions, and I think that is also very encouraging. And so overall, I think the beginning of a very important transformation journey for our industry.
It's really interesting what you said there, because I mean, I had a call recently from a very, very good friend of mine, and I've known him 20 odd years, and he works in sustainability, advising on sustainable agriculture in Asia. He's been in NGOs all the time I've known him. And his view now was that it's really about time that he comes to work for a corporate. Because that's where his cohort is seeing the biggest change and the biggest energy happening. So I think that there really is something in that. And I'm super interested in seeing where that plays out. But you didn't just see the politicians and the media when you were there. I gather you had a bit of a royal encounter.
Yeah, so that was a bit unexpected, but I had the privilege of being asked to brief His Royal Highness Prince Charles in a closed-door meeting about an initiative that we've launched that is called Planet Pledge. So in case you're interested, check it out on our website, so WFA website. So the Planet Pledge is a commitment that is signed by CMOs of major brands, whereby they commit to be climate neutral by 2050 as a company. They commit to encourage their supply chain, and so their agency partners, to do the same.
Yeah.
They commit to upskill marketing leaders and marketing teams. Now, there's a huge effort to be done in terms of making sure marketers understand what sustainability and climate means for us. And most importantly, they commit to leverage marketing communications to drive consumer behavior change. And so we've got 21 major global brand companies that have signed up, including Unilever, IKEA, Mondelez, Mars, MasterCard, and many more. So it's a very good start, and it was good to see that Prince Charles was very much welcoming it and hoping for this to be scaled quickly. And the question to you, David, we have actually one Asia-based CMO who signed up to it, Rupen Desai, the CMO of Dole, and we're going to see him later today in the conference. What's going to be needed for us to be gaining scale in the region, in Asia, on this subject?
It's a good question. I think partly the need for brands and marketers to step up and help change consumer behavior. I think that could be a trigger, and it is the hardest part of the mix. I mean, we've been saying this for a long time internally at Unilever, that you can take the water out of your laundry products, but you can't get the bottle back and recycled without some real help and change in consumer behavior, and that's the biggest piece that we've started to work on. I think it's great you're seeing Rupen later. I think what they're doing at Dole is magnificent, and they've got a very similar DNA to us. They've got a lot of Unilever people there, actually. And I think that's encouraging as well when you go to markets like India, and they call Unilever the CEO factory out there, and not without good reason. I think the best thing we can do is also to recognize the diversity of causes and issues that come up. We did a few years ago, we never published this, but we did an internal survey of our own teams, the entire payroll, to find out what they wanted to see featured most heavily in the Unilever sustainability plan. And the answers, of course, all the usual things about climate change came up, but the answers by market, by region, were dramatically varied. So if you're in China, at the time, it was all about air quality. In a lot of Africa, it was about access to clean drinking water. In parts of Southeast Asia, it was about supporting the agricultural industry and farmers. And so I think we're going to have to find ways to be a bit more nuanced and localized about how we talk about sustainability. But I think the best thing that the Doles and the Unilevers and the MasterCards of the world can do now is just keep doing what we do, because this is not a competition. We spend our lives competing with each other, but there's no first prize for being the cleanest company or cleanest brand in a dead planet. We have to do this together. And it's opening up new areas of collaboration, which sometimes we can surprise ourselves. So we do need to do more, I agree. And I think particularly with, IKEA as well, they've become very focused on this. I think there's an opportunity to get perhaps a different group of people around the table through the WFA conversation. See where it takes us.
That was very much also the rationale for having CMOs sign up to Planet Pledge.
Yeah.
We want to position that as a growth opportunity. Okay, this is not about a charitable thing. This is about embracing the future and seeing the opportunity in terms of growth in the future. And that's where we think an opportunity exists to be scaling it also in Asia. So you were talking about the importance of embedding it in the local diversity in the region. And one of the big priorities we're working on in WFA, as you know, is the diversity and inclusion agenda.
Yeah.
Diversity and inclusion over the last 4 years has basically jumped up to the very top of our agenda. And I think I can still remember my personal aha moment where I sort of realized, we have actually a big problem in our industry. And that is when I saw the research results of the Gina Davis Institute. I don't know if the research they did. So the Gina Davis Institute reviewed the best Cannes Lions campaigns over 10 years, 2006 to 2016. Okay, so they took the shortlisted campaigns over 10 years, and through AI quantified a number of features of those campaigns. And the results were disastrous. Yeah? So twice as many male characters as female characters, men overwhelmingly in positions of authority, women having no humor, 7% of characters being over 60, whereas 19% of the world population is over 60. 2% of characters with disabilities, whereas 20% of the world population has disabilities. So very much projecting an image of society that is outdated. And suddenly it hit home that even the best work of the industry is actually outdated. That was the start of an initiative which we've created in partnership with UN Women called On Stereotype Alliance, which then evolved to embrace a broader theme, which is diversity at large, diversity inclusion at large, and that we're now driving globally. And that is a top priority for us. Now, as we look at Asia, David, now Asia, we call it a region, but we know how incredibly diverse economically, socioeconomically, culturally, religiously Asia is. How does diversity inclusion materialize in
Great question, Stephan. And we keep on going around, circling around this question. It's quite a difficult one to really pin down in Asia from my perspective. I think the first thing that needs to happen is that the brands that are really committed to purpose and to diversity need to keep having this conversation that says purpose pays. Because we know it does. We really know it does. And when I sit in WFA groups, with CMOs and with a lot of the money in the region, if you like, the marketing budgets in the region, pretty much all of the marketers get this and support the idea. Some of them are still not there yet with their CFOs in terms of getting the purpose pays part of the message fully accepted. So I think that's one piece. I think the move now with the On Stereotype Alliance to go, but not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera, will be hugely beneficial in the region. And I've seen that if I ever get to see UK TV. The British TV screens have changed in the last 2 years entirely, and it's very welcome. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this here, though. If I think about perhaps the most groundbreaking work we did, the edgiest work we did in the region, it was for Brooke Bond Red Label a few years ago for our tea brand, where they sponsored a transgender pop band. It won one of those Glass Awards at Cannes. It was groundbreaking. But as I reflect, I now think probably the Procter & Gamble work, Share the Load, was much more progressive in some ways because it didn't take a minority and represent them. It really challenged Indian men to completely rethink how they work. So I think there's more than one way of dealing with this, and not every way that we do in the West is right for this part of the world. So I think we're going to have conversations there, and it's going to have to be navigated really, really carefully, because we're in markets in Asia where, particularly for multinationals, the political structures aren't necessarily the same as in the West, and it doesn't pay a multinational that's trying to do good and create employment around the world to be constantly challenging the status quo. Some things have to be left as the job of governments. Brands can't do it all. So I think we have to understand those nuances and be particularly, we tread particularly carefully and lightly around things like LGBTQI+ issues, because we have to respect social norms, we have to respect religious beliefs, and in some cases, the law of the land. So it's not easy, it's a constant balancing act, but we can do more.
So when we talk about diversity and inclusion in our industry, we talk a lot about the visible part of the iceberg, which is basically the output, the campaigns. But that is only the output or the outcome of an entire process. No, that is the product of teams that are composed in the way in which they are, and of processes that lead to that. And we feel that at WFA that before we sort of start projecting our aspirations and our journey to the industry, we need to start looking at ourselves in the mirror. No, how is our industry doing in terms of itself incorporating and embodying diversity and inclusion? And that led us to run the first, we call it the first global ad industry DEI census. So we basically said, we want to be taking a photography of how people working in the marketing industry perceive their workplace. Do they feel included? Do they feel that their workplace is diverse? Where are the pain points? Before we start ourselves asking others to change. And so we ran that research in an incredible coalition. I mean, we really built across the entire industry a coalition to reach as many people as possible. So we have the FEs who've participated, we have Cannes Lions, which has participated, the International Advertising Association, WPP, Kantar, so a real impressive coalition of stakeholders. And we did that in 28 countries around the world. And we reached 10,000 people working in the marketing industry. And we asked them anonymously to share with us how they perceive their workplace. And some really interesting insights. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, we usually tend to think about gender and ethnic origin, and that is clearly an important dimension of the issue. But the top two criteria in terms of how diversity and inclusion is perceived, the sort of elements that lead to a perceived discrimination, are family status and age, followed by gender and ethnic origin. So really interesting. They may be less spectacular, less visible, but they are very, very important. And when I say family status, it's having the status of a caregiver, whether that's as a parent or whether that's for elderly parents. And very, very significant. Now, 40% of women that responded to our survey, so we're talking about 10,000 people, told us that they felt it hindered their career progression. That is very, very significant when you think about it. Age equally, damn important for our industry, and not something that we talk much about. No? And that clearly leads to campaigns that are the campaigns which we're seeing today. You know, when we say that we don't see people over 60 in our campaigns, that may be also linked to the fact that the teams that actually are in charge of those campaigns don't necessarily represent those demographics. So really interesting insights there. We also picked up so important elements with respect to mental health, and clearly the pandemic has had an impact there. Over 5% of people saying they were struggling with mental health, and less than half of them sharing with their employers. So I think this is also an important warning signal as we come out of the pandemic. And more generally, when you put that into perspective, we as an industry have tended to do better than other sectors. So we clearly have our challenges, and they are coming out really big time. However, compared to sectors such as IT, such as travel, such as education, pharma, finances, we've actually, marketing comes on top. So big challenge there for us as we go forward. We will be working with the local industry in order to be helping progress that. So let me be very clear to your point here. This is not about ranking countries in terms of scores or in terms of providing recipes in order to be addressing issues. This is just so incredibly intrinsically linked to the culture, to the socioeconomic conditions, to the religion. It requires a lot of respect and nuance. So this is about supporting the local ad industry drive progress, and to do that by sharing examples and inspiration, which we picked up in other areas from other countries. So we want to be extremely subtle and extremely respectful as we look at that. But let me be also very clear. One of the reasons why we did this research is we want to apply the rigor which we apply in marketing. Yeah. Okay, so it's not a question of just announcing programs, initiatives, and campaigns, etc. We want to be able to measure whether we move the needle. And so this global research is going to be rerun in 18 months' time, okay? In order to be helping track whether we make progress and identify those areas where we can do better. So this is the beginning.
I think, Stephan, one thing that we may think about for Asia will be, rather than necessarily trying to push people towards a certain way of talking, to perhaps focus more on the red lines that people shouldn't cross, so that we avoid causing an unintended offense. I think that would be a big start.
So David, we've been talking about a number of important issues that are shaping our industry's future. We've touched upon how that plays out in Asia, but talk to me about how you see Asian brands operate in this sort of incredibly challenging environment where things are moving so fast. How do you see the marketing industry and brands evolve in Asia?
I think we all see every day, right, just how much is going on and the speed of change. And I think perhaps COVID kind of has created a bit of a cover so that we don't see the change that's still going on this year, but you'll certainly see it coming up. I see a lot of Asian brands leading from the front. Pretty much everybody in the region is mobile first, because that's the way the public have rolled, right? So we've done the same thing. So we haven't had that painful transition that I think a lot of the brands in the West had. And the thing I've noticed most in the year that's just gone has been the Chinese influence on Southeast Asian e-commerce and the whole look and feel of it. And it is so very different to the Western experience. And I always talk about, if you like, Amazon and Western e-commerce is really a digital version of the department store, very ordered. You know what you want when you go in, you buy, you leave. Whereas here, it's more like a digital version of the shopping mall. It's a bit chaotic, it's lots of fun, it's a lot more browsing, you're not taking a straight path through the place. And I think that's creating a place where people are starting to learn to build their brand equity as well as to sell stuff, because it's becoming an entertainment destination too. The other couple of things I've seen coming up, we've got the very real prospect of a state-owned digital currency in the digital RMB. And that could change a lot of what we as marketers do. And I think it poses an interesting challenge to the US dollar as well, potentially. And then in the last week or so, there's been a lot more, there's been a sudden wave of marketing awards. And Vietnam has been coming out of nowhere for the last year and a half. And it's not just one or two companies. Their presence on the world stage now is significant in terms of being a place that's bringing us great case histories. And it's a market that I guess perhaps because there's been this generational shift from traditional communism to something else. The young marketers there are very eager to learn from the rest of the world and have been very open. So they've just taken the best of what everyone else has been doing, put their own twist on it, and they become a real force for nature. So as I said, I think COVID has perhaps masked some of this from the rest of the world. And there'll be some markets that climb out of the pandemic slowly, but my money's on several markets here in Asia to sprint out of it, and that'll be marketing driven.
And so, David, you're, I don't know if I can reveal it, but you're stepping down, not retiring, but stepping down from your role as Global VP Media in Unilever. An impressive career. I understand 27 years in Europe, 18 years in Asia, correct?
Yeah, sounds about right.
And this incredible vantage point of being of UK origin, having worked in Europe for your base global company, and then 18 years in Asia at a time where all these changes have accelerated on such a scale. So we want a bit of a debrief from you before you leave. So what were the sort of key learnings for you in your role in Asia? What struck you?
So first, I am retiring.
You're retiring, okay.
After 45 years, but I've had so many calls from people who said, "Don't go, do something else with us." So I'm listening to sensible offers from smart, nice people who want some, advisory roles, NEDs, that kind of thing. So that's taken me by surprise. It wasn't in my plans, but.
So you're already changing your plans.
So I am starting to tweak that somewhat, but still looking forward to, after 45 years of 9 to 5, I'm looking forward to that change. I was talking last week, just after 11/11, to a group of New York-based majors, seniors at a university, when one of my colleagues teaches at night. We were talking about China, and I was trying to explain to them, New Yorkers are very proud of the New York minute. The world can change in a New York minute, and I introduced them to the Shanghai second, which is equally as much can happen. Because in China, if I look back at my generation, the people who were born the year I was born were born into the end of the Cultural Revolution in China. They'd been through famine, they'd been through the Great Leap Forward, they'd been through such change, and their world did not look like anything like the West looked like. And yet now China is, competing on the world stage through high tech in a way that no one could have imagined. And the change that population has been through is just extraordinary. And the capacity, what working in China taught me was the human race's capacity to cope with change like most of us never see is there. And I think that started to come to our youth in the rest of the world, but through homeschooling, through dependence on the digital media during the pandemic. So that's always blown me away. That incredible, the British Industrial Revolution times 1,000 in terms of the speed of change, and that will never leave me. What else? I've been very inspired, I think, just by the diversity of the region, because it's so young, and I had to force myself to learn something, especially as a Brit of a certain age from a certain background. When you move to Asia, you bring a certain point of view with you, and I had to rethink that quickly. And I will now tell colleagues in the West, you're not normal. You're the outlier, because if people do things a certain way in India and China, then that's the way the majority of the world does it. So get with the program. Whether that's eating with a knife and fork or the way societies operate. I had to reteach myself that, and I think that's been a really, really valuable lesson. Thailand. My first time here was in Thailand, and I learned very quickly a new word, which was sanuk. And any of you that speak Thai will know that sanuk means fun. It also means work. And it was that idea, it came from the agricultural communities where the whole village would help each other out at harvest time. And that idea of working as a community, which is so important in so many Asian cultures and so absent in the West, was something that really brought joy to me. And I had such a good time there, and I will never forget that team especially. So that's kind of on the more emotional side. I think if we talked about companies that have impressed me, I've loved seeing brands with purpose work, and especially in our case, Lifebuoy. I think the work they've done in the last 2-3 years has been astounding. But I think it's the tech companies that have really impressed me, Stephan. Probably pull out 3, and they're all in the phone business. So if I look to China, I look at Huawei. If you ever get a chance to visit their visitor center, it's the most extraordinary place. And you start by looking at a smart trash can that can tell you when it needs emptying, and you end up in what looks like a James Bond villain's lair, because they've got the whole of Shenzhen up there, and they're controlling traffic flows and doing immense stuff. So that's just amazing. I think also Xiaomi with the Mi range, like it's Apple beautiful, but it's everything you can imagine, right? I mean, I don't know how many connected devices they're up to, but the ambition is to have every home have 100 connected devices of theirs in it, from robotic vacuum cleaners to great phones. But the biggest game changer for me, and I've bored people about this for 3 or 4 years now, is Jio, Reliance Jio in India. Almost free smartphone, almost free data plan, and thanks to voice and translation services, that means 1 billion people have got access to the world's knowledge without having to learn language, having to be literate. And that's more than, it's a great marketing opportunity for us, of course. And Facebook was super fast to recognize it by getting hardwired onto the phones, hard-coded to the phones. But that changes 1 billion people's lives for the better. So that's the biggest one I can think of. And I guess now it's what comes next with the metaverse. Who's going to own it? A lot of people have put their hat in the ring to say, thank you, I'll take that. I actually think that's going to be very Asian-driven. And it's going to be a battle that's won by people who are probably still at college, which is slightly terrifying.
I could keep listening to you for a while, David. It's absolutely fascinating to be hearing your learnings as an Asia veteran. I'm conscious of time, but I want, on behalf of my membership, WFA, on behalf of all the participants here, I want to thank you, David. So David has been our Regional Vice President Asia for a bit more than 2 years, and thank you for your commitment to make the industry better. You've been such a strong voice for us here in Asia. You've helped us build from a relatively young foundation, an organization that is visible, that is respected in Asia. We're all excited about the future, but I want to emphasize how you've been doing that in a uniquely David Porter manner, very inclusive, a real team player, and with a real vision. And it has been such a pleasure to work with you. I want to thank you wholeheartedly for that. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Stephan. Thank you, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm very confident that my successor, when we announce, will be able to bring us every bit as much of the energy to it, and maybe some fresh views as well. So I hope I can leave you in good hands in that respect. And it's great to see you here in the flesh. And I know you're not here for much longer, but I hope you've had a great time in Singapore, and look forward to seeing you somewhere else soon.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.